Hello and welcome back to the Canary Collective podcast. This is Kaeley. It's been a long time, like about 6 months since I did a podcast episode, and I'm so excited to. I didn't ask how you pronounce your name, but I'm here with Adam Hersko-RonaTas.
That's close enough. Yeah,
What
it's
is
Hungarian. In Hungarian, it's Hersko-RonaTas, but I grew up in California, so I say Hersko-RonaTas.
okay, Hersko-RonaTas.
Yeah, that works. I'll respond to it.
Well, you have many, many talents, so it's probably difficult to summarize everything that you do on this earth. But I came across Adam's work. Actually, we came across one another's work a few years ago through the Sunrise Movement, which is an environmental justice youth-led movement. And I was having my album release show in LA, and I think I gave you a CD and you were very
hmm
supportive. You were at that album release show, which was right at the pinnacle of the pandemic. I believe like everything shut down the next day in March 2020. And the winds have blown me back up north lately in Bellingham, but I was in the desert in Joshua Tree for a while and in LA for a while. And so I still feel um, connected. And I just got back from being in LA and California this year for surgery. So the Canary Collective is not limited by geography, but neither is the art projects that you're involved with right now, which are fascinating to me. And I think that you liked a video or something on Instagram, and then I was like, who is that? That sounds familiar, that name. And I saw this amazing video summary of, well, Adam's one of the many talents you have is filmmaking and doing animation and all kinds of just beautiful ways of portraying visual storytelling. And you did
Thank
like
you.
video diary summary of, is it smallest sea, biggest heart, or biggest heart, smallest sea?
The smallest sea with the largest heart.
The smallest sea with the largest heart, which is an art project through, was it through Desert X and
Well,
Metabolic Studio?
it was the artwork of Lauren Bond and the Metabolic Studio that was presented at Desert X. So Desert X is a biennial art show that takes place in Palm Springs. And so Lauren's work was one of, I think it was 11 ultimately, pieces that were around the desert in that area that people could then explore on their own time. What was unique though about Lauren's piece was it was the only one that had like given hours because we had to light it. It was meant to be seen at night, gave it a very distinct atmosphere by just seeing it at night and seeing the water glow because the point was to see the change in water quality over the course of 9 weeks. And so she the design for the piece was to take an abandoned motel pool that was off the Highway 111 and fill it with 22,000 gallons of water from the Salton Sea. And the Salton Sea is weirdly, I don't, it's not talked about much. Or I guess, given that it's the largest body of water in California, and it doesn't really get much attention. But it's basically the tailings of all sorts of agricultural and industrial activity in Southern California, and it's the low point of this valley in the desert. So it's become very heavily polluted. It's super saline, and basically only like some mosquito fish and a few birds and things can survive there. But it's yeah, it's a complicated cocktail of stuff, and it's like a pretty poignant reminder of like how what downstream ultimately culminates in. So all that got put into this pool, or not all that, 22,000 of that got put in, gallons of that end up in this pool, and then a 1-to-1 scale replica of a blue whale's heart was submerged in that water and electrified using solar. So at Metabolic, we like to use solar for as much as humanly possible. And so the team assembled this mobile solar generator that was sitting on this motel, and the panels were put on top of the motel roof. And then that ran 24/7 because there was a battery And so this heart could basically sit in this complicated, polluted soup and run electricity between three cathodes to it. The heart itself had a negative charge. And so it basically made it kind of like a magnet. And so all these different things in the water that, like from salt to other heavy metals, would break apart and then bind to the steel, which was galvanized steel, meaning it had like zinc and some other stuff. So it was like an alloy, I guess. And yeah, but it was my job was to make sure, you know, nobody fell in the pool, and then also like sort of talk about the science and the story of water in this region, because I think in a place like Southern California, we're pretty disconnected from our waterways, I guess, compared to more, you know, lush or like cities built on bigger rivers, I should say. But yeah, so that was really rewarding to just talk to the public coming through, and that was 9 weeks of um, every weekend, I guess Thursday through Sunday, and like winching out the heart, pulling it out so people could see it, see the crystallization of salt and different things growing on it, and then seeing the water quality go from like this really dark amber that was hard to even see. You couldn't see the sculpture at all, and ultimately by the final weeks, you could see maybe like half the sculpture. It wasn't, you know, suddenly magically totally clean. But we did find the quality of the water did shift significantly. So like it went from being very basic, which surprised me. I thought that the Salton Sea water would be really acidic, but it was very basic, and then it ended up neutralizing to 7 pH, and then the phosphorus levels dropped a lot. So did arsenic, and a few other things, but not as notably. But I think the interesting thing about phosphorus dropping in levels is that phosphorus is a really important mineral for excuse me, I guess agricultural fertilizers. So phosphorus is heavily present in fertilizer, and when all that agricultural runoff just runs into the Salton Sea, the phosphorus pools and makes this really fertile bed for algae. And that's why there are these massive algal blooms there. And that's not so bad, because in some ways that's nature healing herself, and you know that cycle is great. Doesn't really need us to mess with it, but algae also chokes out any existing life. So it is, if you reduce phosphorus, then you also reduce algae and certain bacterial growth. But electrolysis has been used in wastewater management in various ways for a while, so it's, you know, it's not radically new or anything, but I think symbolically it was cool to take what is the largest heart of any creature we know of on Earth and pair that with this tiny sea that has been largely forgotten and also quite, you know, abused, not even just neglected, and allow for sort of this reimagining of like a cyborg heart that can heal this space. Also, I mean, just like on a literal note, there used to be whales that swam in that region, which I didn't know about, but I learned that on a prehistoric scale, the Baja California was submerged, and water was pooled all the way up towards sort of the Inland Empire area. And so they've even found there was some whale fossils they found up near Whitewater Wash, which is pretty close to Palm Springs, like just south of Joshua Tree.
Whoa.
So there's history of whales swimming around in that region. And but of course that landscape changed pretty radically over the last few million years.
Yeah, but just spending time in Joshua Tree, like me and my friends would remark often, like, just this just feels like it was once underwater. Like it's funny because everyone's like knows that I'm obsessed with whales and I'm obsessed with orca whales, and I kind of am like guiding my life based on what I can do to help how humans are messing up things for whales and ecosystems. And so everyone was like perplexed why I wound up in the desert, but I kept saying for some reason I feel quite connected to the whales, like being in the desert. even though you think it's maybe the opposite or the furthest thing from the ocean. Even just like some of the plants, they just look like coral. They look marine-like. But yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating. And I think a lot of listeners, whoever's listening to this podcast might, if I were you, I would be confused. Like, what is this and what are they talking about? Because it is quite complex for the average person. And that's part of what I love about so much art, including Lauren Bonds. And I'm sure you can't like totally, you're not officially speaking for her or Metabolic Studio, but you do give to us and you do speak about her work. But I'm, hearing from you, your experience of being involved with it is great. And I encourage everyone to look up as much as you can about Lauren Bond's work throughout the last few decades, because it has been so inspiring to see the way that she uses art as an environmental artist to actually show these replicable models of how we can repair ecosystems. And it can be an artistic, beautiful process of teamwork. And also she's a real badass for figuring out permitting and figuring out structures and working through the matrix of bureaucracy to get funding. It's just really, she's a very powerful person. And I also forgot to ask you if you had any pronouns before I talk about you that you prefer.
Thank you for asking. I go by he, him.
Okay, I go by she, her. So yeah, I started this podcast because, when I was like looking up Lauren Bond's work, I was like, this is very validating. I'm nowhere near as like of a genius as she is, but I just feel like I started this podcast because a lot of my songs or the art that I create, it has so much more that I want to like explain beyond just like the lyrics and just the art itself. And I know some people believe art should just speak for itself and you should just experience it for yourself. But I think that there is a lot to be said for art spurring dialogue. And that's what I want my songs to do. I'm not making music for people to just like have head banging raves to, like, even though there's totally a purpose for that too. But that's not what I'm here to do. And so I was like, maybe I should start a podcast where I kind of am interviewing different activists and artists who, like, all these songs were kind of inspired by learning about ecosystems and learning about the whales and learning about river health and water health. And so, yeah, I am in a way kind of trying to explain the background behind the songs through these interviews so that people can have a more enriching experience of listening to the songs. And so as you experience Lauren Bond's work, having more of an explanation of like what electrolysis is and how it works might make it even more inspiring. But you did such a great job of doing that in such a quick clip of the video diary. But if you can say a little bit more about like how could a heart and the shape of the structure of that and the battery and something about the charge, how could that change the health of the water? It's not like you're injecting medicine into it or a different chemical or anything. It's just how could you do that?
Yeah.
Happen?
Well, it sort of starts from this notion that water has memory and it is very much a living substance. And so you can do all sorts of stuff with it that you would, the human body, which is also mostly water. But in treating water with respect, you can, of course, do more like softer ceremonial things, or you can, go the Western medicine route and like start applying more scientifically rigorous stuff. Like, I mean, electrolysis is a relatively, I guess, simple process, and it's not like again, it's not like some revolutionary technology. It's taking electricity and allowing electricity to move through water from a positively charged thing to a negatively charged thing, and that can be a few different kinds of metal, and we went with steel because steel is a good binding site for all sorts of the stuff that was in this polluted Salton Sea water. So, but yeah, it's electrolysis is a technique for like quite literally energizing water. And what it does is, of course, certain bacteria and things can no longer form. Another way to prevent bacterial formation that isn't just like electrifying water is, and well, it doesn't just clear out bacteria, but it also, changes different compounds. Different molecules will break apart because of the electricity and bind in new ways to other molecules. So that way you can sort of break apart some harmful things. You have to be careful because you might create new compounds that might have their own side effects. And then, but ultimately it also actually is pretty good at pulling out salt. It's not like a desalination thing. It won't, make your water fresh, but it does pull salt out because salt is made of sodium and chlorine, and those break apart as well. So when in this experiment that we were performing, the sodium binds to the heart and creates this beautiful crystal structure sort of growing around it. But then chlorine breaks off, and so does hydrogen and oxygen from the water. So you're getting hydrogen, you're getting oxygen, and then chlorine, which is a natural cleaning agent. So the water becomes more chlorinated with time, which, or I guess naturally occurring chlorine. We're not like dumping in buckets of the stuff. You can just let chlorine naturally form from salt breaking apart. And then you could theoretically gather or collect the hydrogen and oxygen too that's forming as water molecules break apart. But we weren't doing that in this experiment. But you could then recombine them for like extremely pure water, and make basically like perfectly fresh water from 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. But that, to my point at the beginning, is like water is very much alive. So like you'd be creating a pure water molecule, but that is not what makes water water. Like, I mean, yes, technically, but like so much of water has to do with the other minerals and things that are in it. It's an ecosystem.
Yeah.
So if you were to just recombine those, it wouldn't actually be very useful ecologically, unless you reintroduced some other life forms or things that produce the compounds that makes bodies of water so complex and alive.
Well, it's so complex. We're all connected, and it's such an important point that we need to remember if we're going to survive as humans on this planet, let alone other species survive, is that ecosystems are not just one thing and then another thing, and they're separate. It's just so many different parts that if you take one part away, everything is affected. And I love, thinking about water as an ecosystem too, of hydrogen and oxygen and everything too. Is that process of like the natural chlorine occurring similar to, some people say, I have a non-chlorinated pool because it's like a saltwater pool in terms of like a pool in your backyard? I know people use like a
Yeah,
process of salt.
yeah. The pool I grew up learning to swim in was this community saltwater pool, which is so much nicer on the eyes. Weirdly, like chlorinated pools would absolutely destroy my eyes,
Yeah.
whereas saltwater pools were really nice. And I mean, naturally, salt is again, it's a binding agent, so it might. I'm not entirely sure. It might do some cleaning work just by the nature of being salty, and certain cells can't, like bacteria or things can't form when it's a very saline solution that it's like surrounded by. But I also think there's some systems where it uses that salt that's already in there, and then with just a basic little electrolysis setup, it might break apart some of that and then re-inject chlorine, but then it would make it a chlorinated pool. So I'm not sure where the line is.
Yeah.
I'm not a pool technician.
Me neither. But yeah, I mean, so many of these things you've talked about, it's just really, where is the line between science and art is a question that the metabolic studio is circling. And so
Yeah.
how do you know all this sciencey stuff, and how did you get involved in this project?
Well, a funny anecdote actually that reminds me of was something my colleague out at Desert X, Jamie Grace Davis, was sharing with guests while we were out there, because people would ask, "So wait, what is this? Is this science or is this art?" And we would be like, "Well, ¿por qué no los dos?" Like it has both, and that's what makes it, I think, stronger. And then Jamie Grace would tell a story about there was a salon, I believe it was in Boston. I might be fudging the details here, but I know it was in Boston, and at the time, um, artists had all this esteem culturally, and scientists. I mean, there were natural observers, so there were people who would go and observe scientific phenomena, but there wasn't really a word for it yet, at least popularly speaking, and scientist wasn't a word. So one of these natural observers asked an artist, saying like, how could we be taken seriously? How can our field actually get any attention? And one of the artists said, well, maybe, you should name yourself something serious like artist. So like take this science thing and just make it sound like artist. And that's how that's the urban legend of like how the term scientist was born, was to like equate it to the seriousness of artists. And which is, I think, in our given culture now, at least in the US, I would have never guessed it was in that order.
No,
Um,
me neither.
but but yeah, I mean, art's been around for so long, and a lot of great artists have also, had their curiosity bleed into studying the natural world, um, and I think a lot of inspiration for art and creativity is from the natural world. So there's to create this delineation is, again, sort of this folly that we fall into. To your point that like everything is connected, and even if you're just making abstract brushstrokes on a canvas, there's a science to the pigmentation, the way light hits it, the way that your eye is processing something and it goes through your hand and then you recreate it on a surface. I mean, there's like really no boundary there. And so what I love about Metabolic Studio is it's asking people to really reconsider where that boundary is. And then also at a time when things feel quite precarious, especially on like a climactic level, how art can have a certain utility and can address ecology with respect, without sacrificing the beauty of art, or what makes it so magnetic to people usually. And then that just means, yeah, working with technologies that we have now, not being like, not creating these silos of like, all right, there's technology over here in science and then there's art over here, because that, I don't think, will lead us anywhere productive, if we treat those as separate entities.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's a really great urban legend, if that's true, about like kind of scientists coming, borrowing, riding the coattails of the legitimacy of the title of artist. Um, that
I
would
want to
be
look this up, if I may, a second,
yeah, we gotta fact check ourselves.
in real
But
time.
maybe at least one or two people have thought it before.
Yeah.
And the paradigm certainly, I think, was different around science in the last 200 years or a few centuries. We did not have the same assumptions about so many things. We keep changing, based on each century and each year we find new things out. And it's really a lot of what colonization has done to harm indigenous people and the ecosystems, that we're in quite a pickle right now with a bunch of climate crises because of ecosystems being out of balance, like the Salton Sea causing all these health problems in humans, with all of the arsenic evaporating and so many pollutants, and our waterways are dammed, and that is choking off salmon and then starving off orca whales. And so we have a lot of things that humans in the last century were like trying as like an art project of the pharmaceutical companies, or the art project of the fossil fuel companies, or electric companies, utility companies, that are like, what happens when we do this? We like launch this cement into a river to stop it up, and ooh, look, this is what it makes. We can all like have lights on until 11 p.m. in our homes. But whoa, did it cause a lot of fallout that has not been very sustainable. Did you look it up? Did you find out?
Yeah, I got a well, it's more to read than I can go through here, but I think I mistook, so Cambridge, not Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's, I think, Cambridge, like United Kingdom. But it is true. Yeah, it sort of was coming off the coattails of the word artist, and because natural philosopher and cultivators of science was the term that was used for people studying
The natural world. Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
But sorry, you were on a roll. I agree with what sort of like this sort of unquestioned experimentation that then results in consequences naturally, and that we're now sort of seeing the brunt of more and more so, because we're at the tail end of a century of ramping up an industrial revolution.
yeah. And I feel like we can identify a lot of the problems that are going on, but identifying and showing the solutions of where do we go from here? Okay, we've gotten ourselves in this pickle, we're in this mess. And so I'm really excited about what you all are doing with Metabolic Studio, in not only the biggest heart project with the whale heart model, of showing on a smaller scale, although 22,000 pounds of
Gallons.
gallons of water does not feel like a small scale project, but on a small scale, how the power of literal power of what healing water health can do, just with even simple solutions. It was not very simple, but doing, the electrolysis and changing the structure of water to say, hey, it's not hopeless. There are ways that we can heal from this and move forward. And I feel like we need more projects that show that. We need more art that is showing us the ways forward that we could try, and replicating it. But I also was listening to an interview with Lauren talking about the Blue Cornfield project, and she was describing that she was partially inspired by that project, which is, I'm gonna botch it, you can explain more later, but just
Sure.
kind of showing soil regeneration. And it came to her in an image, in a dream at first, that there's this blue cornfield, and she was camping on Catalina Island, and had been studying a lot about what happened to the buffalo of the Americas, which used to, through their hoof patterns and their poop patterns, they did something to really diversify the soil, which we're just in a soil crisis, which is part of one of the biggest reasons why we're having so many climate crises, is like the health of our soil and carbon. But the buffalo, colonizers removed buffalo from North America basically, and just decimated that population. Like, no worries. And it's like, actually worries. Like,
Yeah.
that really hurt the ecosystems in so many ways, and thus hurt us. And so she was camping, and then was surrounded by all these buffalo around her tent. And she said that there was somebody from the Lakota Nation, who's First Nations, who said, I sent that image of the cornfield to you in a dream, because there's this prophecy of a white woman helping return some buffalo home. And it's the beginning of an era of like people with colonizer heritage, like waking up to all the destruction that has happened and trying to make some reparations. So it's really, really cool to hear a bit of that story. And I'm curious if you know much about that project and if she's like continued to try to kind of work with Indigenous people and paradigms to like be guided in what we're doing for the ways forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, um yes. So actually the corn project, not a cornfield. It's called not a cornfield because the city got nervous about growing a cornfield on an old train yard, and didn't want people to eat it, or what was growing there. So she her compromise was like, well, we'll just call it not a cornfield. And
So
so
cheeky.
yeah, and they went with that. They rolled with it. But I've heard her share that that story about Catalina, and she's I mean she's followed that path ever since. She's extremely mindful of uh of indigenous practice, and there are cultural monitors who are from, I think it's the Tongva and Gabrielino tribes, who have been participating in this project right now with bending the river. Um, so she's actively involved with their work, and they've been extremely generous with their time and energy, in sort of, I guess, sort of advising her through some of the projects that she's conducting, because it's a very sensitive thing to do massive infrastructure. Um, it's invasive. Like, we're drilling through soil, like, and that's deep time and ancient clay that's thousands of years old, and disturbing that to allow water. I mean, the purpose is to allow this watershed to sort of return to where it would have naturally flowed, in a way. And I mean, it's symbolic, because the water that Bending the River is pulling is from the LA River Channel. But this all started like way back in like 2005. So Lauren had this vision for making and growing corn, um, in this derelict brown site, which was formerly a train yard that was housing all these, like, just, I think, decommissioned engines. And so you have all this, oil and metal and various things leaching into that soil. And fun fact, actually, speaking of buffalo, the train routes through this region have largely followed the trails of buffalo, because buffalo are obviously finding passages through mountain ways that are safe, or at least for them. And so when the train engineers showed up here, they followed the buffalo to figure out where it would be most convenient for them to lay their train tracks. So at best it's biomimicry, but at worst it was to, like, really mess up the migratory patterns of these animals the indigenous people of this area relied on. So that's a whole nother thing. But the ultimately, when this derelict train yard was going to be converted into just an empty lot, Lauren suggested and proposed doing this project. And for, I think it was a year or two, they grew 32 acres of this blue corn, and it was an heirloom corn. And that was, I mean, it's such an effective plant at pulling heavy metals and things out of soil. And so there was also a lot of community building around it. People would gather, and there was music and food and a lot of good conversations that were had in this cornfield, which felt very surreal. This was way before my time. I was a kid. I didn't even know LA was a city, probably, but it must have been surreal. And from photos, you can see sort of it feels like the Wizard of Oz, where you have like the Emerald City, like the towering skyline of downtown LA, and
Yeah.
then in the foreground is just these just endless rows of corn. And so once, though, that was completed, the LA State Park System had made plans to turn that space into a state park, because the state park system has only really dealt with land that is like way outside cities. And so this is, I think, their first urban project. So the state park system converted that space into now what is just sort of like a big grassy area. But they also have a lot of water needs because there's a lot of turf. And in trying to meet the water needs initially, when Lauren first put the corn in, she was like, well, there's all this water that's just flowing down the LA River a few hundred feet away. Why not just take this wastewater and use it to water the corn? And when she went guerrilla, so she's someone who, well, of course depends, but she doesn't normally like to wait for permission because these systems are much slower than is useful, especially in these kinds of urgent things. So so she just went to get the water herself with a water truck. And after I think a couple times of going down, filling up the water truck, going back up, some local authorities stopped her to ask what was up, and then they said, you can't do that. This is a liability issue. Like, if someone gets sick because you water your corn with this wastewater in the LA River, we're going to get sued, or LADWP will get sued. And so we can't have that. She's like, okay, fine, I'll do it by the book. So she talks to LADWP and they say, okay, fine, what do you want to do? And so she said, okay, we're going to build a water wheel. We want to build a giant water wheel that will lift the water and carry it over to the park, and it'll be this grand monument. And the Army Corps of Engineers, which owns the LA River, was like, okay, we can, we're into that. That sounds exciting. It's gonna be this giant engineering achievement to have this water wheel. Why not? Let's approve it. So they gave the thumbs up for her to divert a little bit of that water with this water wheel. But then LADWP said that, well, if Lauren was going to deliver water to the State Historic Park here in Chinatown for free, that didn't matter. It was still going to be LADWP's responsibility. And so they wanted to charge her. And so they insisted that she had to pay by the gallon for the water that she was going to be giving out to this park for free. So she said, that's absurd. No way. And so she went to the State Water Board and applied for a water right. And it's and I don't think she seriously thought it would work out. I think it was pretty hazy as to if that was like a legitimate possibility. And ultimately the State Water Board agreed and gave her the first private water right to an individual in the history of LA. So it's funny because she likes to point out that she's like, there's her and then LADWP. So she's like a really tiny mini utility that it's a very small right. And she doesn't even like to use the word right because that's complicated and like, who owns water, right? So right. It's like a water responsibility. But yes, in the paperwork, she is responsible for delivering this water safely. And it's an appropriative right. It's not a right that is given to somebody who lives on a land that has a creek on it. That's sort of this default right. But this is an appropriative use. So she's demonstrated the utility of diverting wastewater that would otherwise just go to Long Beach into the ocean to LA State Historic Park to irrigate for the next 10 years is the agreement, with the option to extend. And then in the meantime, all that water has to get cleansed. So again, at Metabolic, we're trying to partner with nature as much as we can. So the filtering systems aren't a matter of just bombing it with more chemicals. It's letting it run through sort of a cyborg watershed. So creating a wetland system with native riparian plants that, again, because roots are so good at pulling things from soil, and then beans especially are really good at re-nitrogenating soil. Although in this case, this is for water, that's not so big of an issue, but water filters really well through soil and roots. And so if you can create a system of wetlands, you can clean the water basically to a usable degree. But we also have to experiment with, how are plants affected? I mean, plants are crazy resilient. You can grow plants in all sorts of crazy stuff. So, but I would be interested in testing the leaves and, flowers or fruits that grow on those kinds of plants, because most heavy metals and pollutants get stuck in the roots and stems, but some of that might transfer out to leaves and fruit and whatnot. So again, this cyborg watershed that we're building at the studio, we're not going to be no one's going to be eating from, but I'm just kind of curious what that'll be like, because we're going to be allowing all this heavily polluted water in the LA River to run through this, like, human-made wetlands to then filter through flow forms, which that allow water to like flow in a figure eight and keep it from getting, further bacterial growth, because it's not stagnant, and then running over to the State Historic Park. But what has been such a major challenge, and why this has taken over, I guess, 12-ish years now, is because so I mentioned this water wheel that was scrapped. So this goes back to like, what's the utility of art here? It's about incentivization. Bureaucracies, bureaucracies are just made up of people. And, it's not, even if the bureaucracy as a whole, being more than the sum of its parts, is inefficient and causes problems, the people within it all sort of agree that, and are also moved by art and exciting ideas. And so when Lauren approached them with this dramatic water wheel concept that was very sculptural, it got their imaginations going, and it got them to have a dialogue about, like, so what if we did something with all this water that we're just letting run to the ocean? And as soon as they approved the use of the water, Lauren scrapped the water wheel and was like, we're not doing a water wheel. And they're like, what? Like, that was such a cool idea. Like, and she said, well, yeah, no, that's not the point. The point is to have a system that's replicable and also less invasive. A water wheel is dumb expensive, a lot of steel, but now, like, she was like, actually, we're going to do the most simple plumbing we could possibly do. It's going to be clay pipes. Again, we don't want to use PVC to like shed more microplastics into the soil and stuff. So it's all clay pipes. It took 2 years to get the permits to use those instead of PVC. So that was insane. Like, it was just like, we want to use clay pipes. They're like, well, we have to go back to the drawing board. 2 years later, approval, clay pipes can go in. And finally, it's the opposite of rocket science. It's literally just like a gravity-fed aqueduct that runs from federal property, because the LA River is not the city of LA's, it's the feds, because of the Army Corps. So you have to get approval from the federal government. Then you're going underneath state train tracks through private property over a city street into a state park. So you're literally moving across every tier of bureaucracy. And that's why it took we're almost at 100 permits to just get a few hundred feet of pipe laid to take water that is just going to waste anyway.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's not for the faint of heart. Most people give up amidst the patriarchal thousands of hoops they make you jump through, but not Lauren, I guess. It's really, really providing so much hope to, as I said, to feel like it's possible to heal a really toxic earth, really polluted earth. It's easy, especially in all of the ways that I talk through the Canary Collective's kind of philosophy of like, we are canaries in a coal mine who are crying out saying, whoa, the air and the water and soil is really toxic. And just because you're not feeling the effects necessarily consciously right now doesn't mean that you won't in the future. So listen to the people who are sensitive, who are feeling it, and the animals and plants who are feeling it now, before it's too late for all of you. And let's get out. But it can feel hopeless when I always talk about how polluted everything is, to be like, oh no, it's hopeless. But it really is inspiring even to see. I don't know if you've seen the documentary Return of the River, about like the Elwha River dams that were removed. Just that story is so inspiring, because a lot of First Nations activists teamed up with a lot of First Nation scientists and a lot of people locally. They changed like the unanimous vote of a town council who had unanimously said, no way are we going to remove this dam. And then through persuasion, they persuaded all of them to be unanimously in favor of removing the dam. Like, it's possible to wade through the bureaucracy, and they were able to see through scientific argument and powerful storytelling and art that, okay, I guess it's a really smart idea to remove the dams And it just surpassed everyone's wildest dreams about how fast the fish returned and how fast the ecosystems healed when we had that solution. So it really gives me hope to know that some things we can repair. It's not too late, but we can't move at the pace that the bureaucracy wants us to move. So this is a crisis moment once again, and that calls for getting creative and moving us out of our intellect of like, this is, it's not possible. Sorry, red stamp. And so I agree with you. That's like a big goal of the Canary Collective, as we've talked about, is to use artistic storytelling and human dialogue to shake the decision makers out of their minds and into their hearts to really feel the impacts of the problems and feel the hope for the solutions. So I'm so glad that you all are doing the work that you're doing. And before we close, also, like I told you, I gave you a little warning that we always like to do a little imagination exercise on this podcast. So pretend that we're in a time machine and we're having a reunion Adam and Kaeley podcast episode interview in the year 2040. And I actually got this from a Rainforest Action Network exercise where they would do these workshops around the world trying to get people to imagine a healed earth and what that would look like and taste like and smell like and feel like, and to really vividly feel it with our senses. And they stopped doing those workshops, but I was so glad that they did them. So it's 2040, and the worst of the climate crises have been avoided. I don't know how we did it. I guess we can imagine how we did it, but it's done. It's a miracle, and we saved a lot of species we thought were going to go extinct, like the resident killer whales in the Salish seas. And we honored treaty rights, and we had so many Indigenous activists get supported by lawyers doing pro bono work and just having reparations and treaty rights actually honored so that we were repairing these rivers, ecosystems. Aren't you glad that the Metabolic Studio did those projects and then they were replicated? I mean, I'm so glad that we did things to make sure that people felt the importance and the possibility of healing waterways. What do you think were some of the like most important turning points that like garnered a lot of
now that
attention?
Now that it is 2040.
Now that it's 2040, like looking back at 2024.
Yeah. Wow. So yeah, it's been so long. And you know, I'm so grateful for the urgency with which people started to really approach the issue. I think urgency is sounds scary, and I remember there was all sorts of panic for a bit, and there was those few flood events that definitely left a lot of damage, and I think really were the spurs for people to really get involved. And it was tragic that it took some more intense weather and people really feeling it at home to understand the severity of what we're doing. But yeah, like all those plastic bans, that was sick. Like I remember we had like we had a party in a park after they banned all the plastic, and everyone brought their own metal utensils for the food, and everyone had their own bottles that were like reusable canteens, and people brought homemade food that they were growing in their yards. So it was that was a great day.
I mean, everyone does that now, but it's so funny to remember when that wasn't the norm. We used
it was
plastic bottle.
Those single-use plastics, it was insane that like you would go and order food and you would get something for use once, and then you just throw it away and out of sight. What is away?
Yeah.
Like what? And so the fact that like now I mean, there's still a few dumps. Obviously, like there's those waste treatment facilities outside the city, but like I think they're way smaller now, and definitely like better at processing because I don't think they just get as much stuff anymore. People are, I don't, yeah. I mean, culturally, it's cool to see that people just know that stuff is like there to serve them. They're not there to serve stuff, and like it's not about accumulating things. I mean, yeah, you still have probably a couple of those greedier people up in the mountains doing their shit. But I'm glad that the culture has sort of shunned that, or has no longer celebrates excess as like this thing to aspire to, or like, or like that it's cool to be like super rich and to just spend a bunch of money, which is, money just being a symbol of like energy expend and resources like exploited usually. That's a
Yeah.
dramatic take, but
So not cool, billionaires. That's so last season, so 15 years ago. Oh my gosh,
yeah.
get with the picture.
I hope Elon Musk is having fun on Mars. I don't know what it's like up there, but that's
Yeah, he's unfortunately not as cool as he thought he was.
he's living in his own self-made hell. So that's
Yeah, unfortunately. But we do, I mean, sometimes people have to learn the hard way, but I'm glad that the majority of people through powerful storytelling and all the films that you made, like those were real game changers for the public paradigms to shift.
thank you. I was really hoping that by showing stories with like a serious emotional truth that it would sort of bridge that divide between like the super like academic world that understands the scientific reality of climate change, and has always been ahead of the curve and has been like yelling that from the rooftops since like it was like way back in the mid 1900s, like um so the fact that in order to reach people where they're at, I think it is always about finding where people are connecting, and movies are just one of many, music too, but I think that if you can show people not like a didactic like blueprint, you don't have to be preachy and be like this is how to do stuff, but at least show them not only what's wrong, because I remember back in like the early 20s, there was all this like media and stuff about like, oh, everything's a disaster, look how much stuff is like falling apart, and that is a definitely effective way to get people aware of an issue. But it wasn't, I think already by the time like we were talking way back in like 2023, people understood the scope of the issue for the most part. If they hadn't, they were living under a rock or just willfully ignoring this reality. So like um it was it was more about showing, I think people would have willingly lined up to do stuff and like wanted to get involved. So it was finding things that they could do that felt achievable, and creating new role models and like new mythology around, what the heroes of like addressing ecology might look like. So yeah, it was really a journey. And I mean, I learned so much too, and like I thought I had stuff figured out when we set out to do some of those projects, and definitely not. Like, just what's so fun about filmmaking is you encounter these different people everywhere you go, and they will always humble you by showing you things that you could have never planned for in the process. So, but that's the dialogue that it forms and sort of and triggers too. That's so it's not just about sharing movies or art or music that have the message. It's also in the creation of that art, you're engaging with people everywhere, and that exchange is what also, I think, hopefully had some part in growing the world to where we're at now.
Yeah. Yeah, totally it did. I mean, I'm just so glad that you did the projects that you did and you answered that call from within. And I feel like I can't imagine what it was like way long ago when people were like still smoking cigarettes in airplanes. Gross. But that was like so normalized when my mom was in her 30s. And
Crazy.
now it's just out of the question. So I'm glad that we had those shifts of it just being out of the question that we would use plastics. And now I remember around the year 2020, like in the pandemic, like that really shifted people, of course, to being aware that we need to slow down and like what can happen when we like pause air travel mostly for a while. And also, like, do you remember What About Bunny and like the talking dogs? Like that was the beginning of humans starting to understand what was possible about like animal intelligence. And
Mm-hmm.
we started realizing that dogs can talk, and like, okay, well, what else is thinking more than we thought they are? And so we started to realize how valuable whales are to the ecosystems and bees are to the ecosystems, rather than just like plunging forward and being like, humans got this, we know what's up, we know what to do. We're following the buffalo to actually learn, how do we restore what we've ruined? And we're following the whales to learn from their hearts, like, how can we restore what's ruined? And how can we listen to dogs about what park to go to? Haha. But
Yeah,
yeah, I'm glad that we are honoring animals more now.
yeah, I turned off the talking dog collar a couple of years ago. My dog was just always telling, but I still talk with my dog. That's
You
that was
just do
easy.
it through telepathy, the
I
old.
didn't, yeah, I'd rather just engage with the dog on the level that is naturally carved out for us. Cause man, I'd wake up at night, just be like, food, give me food. So, but
Yeah.
obviously we still have a dialogue, and like, I think that reacquaintance with the web of life and people having a, a much broader understanding of our place in this greater network, is cool. I mean, again, just culturally for a while, I think we were pretty self-absorbed and thought that humans were really just everything. And we were just missing the point for like a good 100 years or so. And it's pretty lucky I mean, that's a short blip in human history, but like, we'll probably look back at this, like there was the Bronze Age and the Iron Age or whatever. And now there was the plastics age.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I mean, there's plastic here and there. You need it for certain specific things, but like I think we now know that's like a precious resource that we don't abuse, and it's for medical supplies and like things where it couldn't be anything else. But
Plus, we have the mycelium that we discovered can break down plastic, so that's
which
good.
is thick. Those facilities are wild. Yeah, I bet you visited those?
Oh, of course, who hasn't?
Yeah. Are they playing your songs at that whale sanctuary still? I remember there was that album release, and um, there was dolphins and orcas. I don't know if they still had humpbacks there. There, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. There's like Lil Free Willy who like dropped an album with me. It was like a collab. It's been such an honor to like drop albums in collaboration with the whales now. And yeah, they're
that's
still playing that music of the whale sounds plus human vibrations. And I'm so honored. We definitely needed to realize a few things about just moving past Newtonian physics. And I'm glad that humans figured it out, to realize we're complex electrophysiology of our bodies and of our ecosystems is so much more beyond what we can cut open and piece back together and call it good.
yeah. There's also like, I mean, now we're swimming in all these new. I don't know if it's not really like religions, but I mean, philosophy, theology, it all lumps together. Um, and I love that it's not so dogmatic now. It's not like some like hard church where you're like, this is how it's got to be. But all the new sort of like, I get kind of like, churches ish things that sort of arose, or maybe like shrines to nature that people gather around, and like um, it's, I think at first in like maybe the late 20s or something, I thought that was like could go real culty or something, but it's like it's super wholesome, and like it's cool that you know spirituality found its way back into what was a super secular period, because like growing up, religion was not a focal point. um and I think a lot of American society has sort of willfully steered away from it, understandably, because so many churches like back in the 20th century were like super abusive and just using their power for the wrong things. So of course people distrusted like religion and spirituality, but it's nice that that's sort of made a return, because that in combination with science and all this like more pragmatic thinking that came from the Enlightenment, like way back, has now sort of come full circle, and I think is like now a fusion of the religion, or I shouldn't say religion, but again, like that spirituality that was maybe let go of in service of just like hard science, engineering, full throttle for like the last 200-ish years.
Yeah, yeah, you're so right. I feel like it was so ready to go way too far, and it did go way too far on the side of like this polarization during the pandemic of people who were really like, oh, we don't need to worry about an airborne virus because I just think positive thoughts and follow this cult leader who says that all I need is to just meditate 10 minutes a day and then like a virus can't get into me. Okay, well tell people in Flint, Michigan to just think positive and the lead in the water won't affect them. Sure. But
Exactly.
I think we needed that swing of the pendulum to realize and build the guardrails against like going too far on either end of the spectrum of too like spiritual and believing that it was, everything's just spiritual and science and like the physical world and physical rules don't matter, to just this like over accentuation of the physical realm and nothing spiritual, or mystical. So I'm really grateful to all of the powerful films like The Vow and all these series that came out that were calling out cult-like paradigms in whatever shape and form. And I think that like it helped us be more awake about what the cult of the American experiment, where it had its shortcomings of not honoring, some indigenous ways of viewing and honoring every living being, and viewing things from the perspective of 7 generations ahead, not just thinking about the next quarter's profits for a corporation that wants to frack. So
Yeah.
yeah, film
Well,
is cool.
yeah. Oh yeah. It's a great, I mean, yeah, it's great as a cautionary tale, and it's great as a blueprint or like sort of a guidepost for people's optimism. Um, and yeah, I think there's like, I mean, for a while, I think I was skeptical because I was like, well, filmmaking feels like playing make believe, and there's too much important stuff happening right now to really just be doing that and like LARPing with a camera somewhere. But I realized it's more than that. It's not. You're not. I mean, of course, it can be depending on what you're trying to make, but it's really, again, it goes back to what I felt I was really or felt very instilled in me thanks to Lauren at Metabolic Studio, which is that art really is sort of the excuse to do the right thing. And the
Mm.
reason why there's so many different avenues of exploration happening in the art space and people who have helped change the world for the better here is because it was never really about the how. I mean, that's important, but the how is only important once you've established a clear why. And the conditions of our time sort of, I think, forced a very clear why. And so the how could be so many different things, and that's movies, it's music, it's policy, it's construction and architecture, it's education. Like it was so many things. So, but those are just a means to an end, and there was maybe this major shift that needed to happen on like a collective consciousness level of like, where are we trying to go, and then we can sort of reverse engineer how to get there. Otherwise we're just going to keep charging this train ahead in a direction we don't know where it'll take us, and we've already started to see it's taking us into a into a little bit of a dark valley. But what's great about that is that's not permanent, and there's always brighter pastures. So we found that to be the case, so that's I feel so lucky.
Yeah. Well, past Adam and Kaeley in 2023, let's reach out from the future and say, hey, let's reverse engineer. How do
Yeah.
we get to that future? Well, I'm
Yeah.
all mixed up with time now.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
now are we back in 2023?
Yeah, let's come back, unfortunately, to 2023.
Ah, dang.
That was a good imagining.
Yeah, that felt very cathartic.
Yeah.
I hope we can say most of that's accurate
I
in,
know.
was that
Yeah.
17 years?
Yeah. Let's do it. We'll have a
Should definitely
reunion.
check in.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's gonna be sad. Yeah. I just
No, we'll check
listened.
in.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's gonna be great. It's gonna be great. I think we still, it's like, I don't know if you believe in fate, but I feel like there's always the chance to alchemize a situation. Maybe it's like likely that we'll head in a bad direction, but maybe there's still a 2% chance. And so we can increase our odds with action.
absolutely. Also, like, just it's not that you can will away any, you know, uh, bad consequences of past actions. Like karmically everything plays itself out, and the way we've abused nature and resources will have effects. There's no doubt it'll be a hotter world, and um, but if we just hold that in our mind's eye, we're still kind of stuck in the past. And I found that like cynicism is like really actually quite dangerous, because it's not that you should be like happy-go-lucky and like naively optimistic, but if you can hold that sort of focus on the optimism, I think attention is crazy powerful. And like you said, to to use your word, like it does alchemize a reality because it will color your actions and decisions day to day that culminate into what reality becomes. And so I hope that everyone stays optimistic, because there is reason to be pessimistic, but the reason here is not the point. And we've been so caught up by reason for so long that I think a little bit of irrationality and like hope that maybe feels less rational is necessary.
Actually, maybe the most rational thing to do because it's a great survival skill. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, very true. Well, I've been having dreams, which I explain in other podcast episodes, and I won't go into, but I basically had a dream ever since I was 5 that I rendezvoused with orca whales from shore, from a specific beach on San Juan Island, and I like had that dream come true 4 days in a row where I asked like where they were, and I let my heart lead me to where like each beach I would like arrive, and then they would arrive and swim, and um things like that aren't rational, where you just transcend what I thought where I should go, intellectually, but I just tried to follow follow the irrational. Sometimes it ends up getting you to the place that you wanted to go. And so a mix of science and art is very important. And I see Lauren doing that, of following her dreams literally and following the images that she gets, and definitely incorporating science and rationality into her art as well. So I'm so glad to learn more about the work, but it's just like so layered. We haven't even scratched the surface of
Yeah,
everything that you're
too
doing.
much.
So, how can people find you and your work, and then also Lauren's work?
Absolutely. So Lauren's work is through Metabolic Studio. If you go to metabolicstudio.org, you can find out about all the different divisions and projects, and also Metabolic Studio on Instagram. And then I also am on Instagram. I'm Adam HRRR, and you can feel free to reach out there. I have most of my work there, and then I also have a website that's www.ahrtwork.com. It's just my initials.
Very clever.
It's
Convenient.
kind of annoying. In hindsight, it's annoying, but yeah,
No,
I have the
all
domain
recorded.
now.
That's funny. Well, it's such a pleasure to talk with you about this stuff, fellow human trying to figure this out.
You as well. Thank you, Kaeley. This is awesome. Thanks for holding this kind of space and spurring these exercises of imagination.
Yeah, it's replicable. Everyone can have these conversations for the 2 people who listen to this on YouTube or whatever. And
Yeah, thank you
we're
for listening.
getting to this
You've listened
point.
this far.
Yeah.
Seriously, bless you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Adam. Talk to you soon. Hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Are we signing off, or does it just stop?
I'll stop the recording.